Well, it's a joy to be here with one of my favorite people, the one and only Holly Roberts, speaking to us from her beautiful studio and Adobe home in New Mexico. Um, and I will confess that I have been a fan of Holly's and I've been stalking her for about 40 years. Allow me to brag about Holly for just a minute or two, which is one of my favorite things. I want to get her legitimate bona fides out of the way first. You know, most of us spend our lives trying to get an NEA grant, a National Endowment for the Art grant. Holly has two NEA grants. And recently in 2018, the prestigious Griffin Museum of Photography in Massachusetts gave her a huge retrospective of her work and also published an extensive catalog. Her first national success happened in 1989, and that's a year that's very near and dear to all of us in Carmel because the Friends of Photography began in Carmel in 1967, founded by Ansel Adams and others, as we all know. And as time went by, the Friends of Photography decided to move to the big city. So they moved to San Francisco in the late 80s, and they called themselves the Friends of Photography at the Ansel Adams Center in San Francisco. And many of us, thought that was an epic, epic move. And all of us were wondering what will be their first exhibition to open the new huge facility in San Francisco. And you know who was selected for the very first solo exhibition at the Friends of Photography in San Francisco, Holly Roberts. And here is my beloved catalog from that show, signed. And she just blew the house down. What we're going to see today and what we're seeing on the screen right now is an incredibly innovative artist who mixed photography with painting. Now, photographers had been hand coloring photographs from day one as a way of making color photographs, but nobody came along with Holly Roberts' style of printing a photograph. And these are the silver gelatin days, printing in a darkroom. She used to borrow Joel Peter Whitkin's trays. Maybe Holly, you can tell us some scandalous stories about your neighbor there. I've heard kind of some sad things about him lately, and I hope it's not true. But anyway, she had the courage, she had more courage than the rest of us to actually oil paint over a gelatin silver photograph in a very opaque way. So she's in a way overruling the photograph. And that became incredibly powerful, as we'll see. And she also then made a stylistic change, and I'll let Holly tell us all about it, in which she kind of reversed, instead of paint over the photograph, now she collages and photomontages beautiful photographic images on top of a painted background. I could go on and on bragging about her, and I definitely want to ask her along the way or take everyone's questions. You're all free to chat with Holly along the way. But I do want to talk about Holly's other life, the other hat she wears so beautifully in being an educator. She is America's favorite workshop teacher from coast to coast. And I want to ask Holly for some of her advice about our own art. And I have had the pleasure of attending some of her workshops, and I want to ask her about some of the techniques she uses to bring out the best in everyone. I will try and stop bragging about Holly and let her show us her beautiful visual career. It's a pleasure to have you here, dear Holly Roberts.
Thank you, Brian. So it's a long time to go back and look at work that we have a good period of time here. So I thought I would go pretty far back and just try and talk about the work, how it developed. They're stories. They're all stories. They're personal. And so I'll just be talking about where I was, what was happening. I also have a blog called Holly Roberts One Painting at a Time. And I do the same thing. I take images. I talk about what was going on in my life, what was going on in the big picture, small picture. And it sort of has helped me clarify now that I'm older, looking back and sort of figuring out what I was doing then. So I wanted to go back and start with this image, which was probably done around, 1981. And what happened before that was that I was at Arizona State University, and I took a photography class, and I was really loved photography. And I thought, oh yeah, I'll do photography. Well, I have a brain that doesn't do well with photography. I never did get the aperture, whether you're closing it down means bigger or smaller, or, the faucet deal, just I'd forget it and get confused. But you can always take a photograph, and I learned how to print in the darkroom. And then there was a woman named Karen Truax, who was doing these beautiful hand-tinted photographs using oil paints. There was Marshall oils, they were called. And she would do these fabulous tintings. And I thought, well, I can do that. I have these photographs, and I got my Marshall oils. And at the same time, I was also a painting and drawing major. So I was really working, painting, drawing, developing my images that way. But this was like a little sideline. So I started out tinting the photos, and guess what? No ability to tint the photos, no patience, no skill, no. But what I could do was cover the photograph with paint and then wipe the photograph back out. And these amazing images began to develop. And it took me a couple of years to realize that the photographs were much more powerful than the regular images I was doing, the still, the drawn and painted things. So that's what I'm going to go with, is really to show this development of these photographs. But I can't remember what Brian said. He had a great term for it. What I use is abusing the photograph, but it's really having the photograph be either parallel to the paint or in back of the paint. And I think, again, and everybody's always said, well, it doesn't matter if you can print a good photograph because you just cover it up with paint anyway. And so I've always held that dear to my heart. So this first image is actually a self-portrait. It's called Woman Bathing. And it was a nude photograph of me. So of course, what you do is you just put on a swimming suit and put in some water and paint around it. And the oil paint is so fun. It's just sexy and fun and forgiving. You can, with the gelatin silver prints, you can come back forever and ever, and up to 6-7 hours, and that paint stays wet. So I would do these always at one sitting, and that allowed me to come back in and change it and move it around. And this is little. I also started out doing these small ones, and then begin to move up in size. I also was sort of developing as a photographer. I was going out at night and taking blurry photographs, which had this beautiful magic. This was at the Yuma racetrack for greyhounds. And I think the skill that you're not seeing here is that one of the hands is painted, but it's painted to look like a blurry photograph. I mean, that's really skill painting, to make something look bad by painting it. So I took tons and tons of photographs of these wonderful greyhounds with their handlers, and the strange people, and the way they would run down the track. And I moved up to a bigger size paper, which was a big deal. Anytime you make a jump as an artist, it's kind of a shocking, oh my gosh, this is 2024. And but you do it, you go ahead. So this is around, again, early 80s. The next thing that I did was I took I took the big thing to heart. I got big trays, great big 30-40 trays, and I got the biggest paper I could, and I began to print multiple images. So for instance, this horse being led, this is called, this was 3 photographs of the horse, which if I were more skilled, they would have fit, but they didn't really fit. They were, the legs overlapped and so forth. But again, it didn't matter, because then when I went to paint them, I got this wonderful overall image of the horse, and him being led by this. He was a huge horse. He actually, Santa Cruz. He's was owned by a friend out there, and he was so enormous that he just dwarfed people. So that was kind of my feeling of what I was trying to convey. The other thing I want to just start out right from the beginning is that when I start, I don't have any idea of what I'm going to paint or what the image is going to be. I start out, I struggle, I suffer, I'm miserable, and then I'll get a clue as to what the painting's going to be about, and then I'll follow that. And I might get the clue after 20 minutes, I might get the clue after 3 or 4 hours. But the clue gets me out of my head and allows the image to become the most important thing. And that's the way I teach. I try and tell people to check their minds at the door, tell their brains to go out and smoke a cigarette, and let their hands and their emotional connection guide what the image is going to be. So that's what I've always done. And I find that these stories come out that are about my life, but I hope are deeper, that are about, connect us to everything. So this is, again, another big multiple one. I think these were 20, 30 pieces of paper. And this was an image of a young neighbor who lived across the street, and she would come babysit for us, and very attractive young woman. Kirsten was her name. And she was having trouble with her family, and she was doing sort of dyeing her hair and piercings and tattoos and stuff. But we stayed connected and friends. So I had her come over. She shaved her head. I photographed her, and then I ended up doing this painting, which is called Woman with Figure Inside. And it's a favorite image. It's quite large. It's these 40 panels. And you can see her in there, and then this other figure inside that became both. You can see her feet. I took down, put little tiny high heels. She's got her crossed arms, but also the figure's arms. So I stayed in touch with Kirsten, and then about 4 or 5 years ago, she died. And it wasn't clear if it was suicide or if she had simply overdosed on medication. And to me, this painting was prophetic. It was really about that thing going on inside of her that was eventually going to take her out. And that's happened a couple of times where I've had real prophetic paintings. And this is one of them. This is around this time. Of course, I was starting to have children. I have 2 daughters, and began to photograph them and paint them. And this is my older daughter, Raimi. And it's a little hard to see, but the face, this is Teal, my younger daughter. And Raimi is very kind of centered and calm, and Teal is not. She's just like a wild child. So she became the dog, and this is called Child with Dog on a Leash. And it's really sort of about the relationship, it's about Teal's spirit, it's about Raimi's spirit. And again, I use the paint to paint out the background. The story begins to evolve. There was another person there. You can see the mouth, but that got painted out entirely. Around this time, I began to experiment with taking the photograph and adhering it onto panels. And what that did is it gave me not only the background of the photograph, but a bigger size and a white background, which meant I couldn't use the photographic information to provide the source material. I had to come up with my own paint because the white doesn't really say anything. So if you can see, there's a line around this is the photograph. I think it was a 8x10 right now, whatever. And then of this young man, a student. And then this, of course, is the panel around it. So I began to adhere those photos down and then come back in and paint. And I've done lots and lots and lots of portraits, and I feel like for instance, this portrait captured this very sweet young man. Something about the face and the smile, and there's sort of these Picasso heads that are turned both profile and full at the same time. So this again is daughter Teal. It's called Wolf in the Forest. And it's probably an image that is the most popular image I've ever done. And I even had a publisher use it on a book about schizophrenia, which I thought was kind of interesting. And it's Teal. She'd lost some teeth. So this was a portrait of her. And then it turned into this small wolf. And of course, the forest and the moon, they're all painted in. And again, you can see that I was beginning, more and more, I was adhering the photo to the panel. A lot of my paintings have been about relationships. I've been married for a long time, almost 50 years. And it's just hard. It's hard. You got to figure it out and work things through. And I think that a lot of times when I'm doing these images, it's as I'm working through with these personal issues. But this is called couple fighting. This is actually my husband Bob on the left and my cousin Mike on the right, but I turned him into the spouse or the wife of the couple. And they had posed making faces for me, but these just became this perfect example of this couple fighting. And then the paint just is that vibrant, active paint. Again, this is another sort of all-time favorite. It's called Tired Angel. And I'll have people pose for me, but mostly I have them do whatever they want. I don't tell them what to do. And this is a friend who's an artist. And he had on that butt pack and those Bermuda shorts, with the plaid, and he was just kind of goofing around, and then the painting ended up being this beautiful tired angel, just exhausted. And you can see also that when I was taking the multiple photographs and putting them together, now I was doing the same thing. These are 3 different photographs, but glued onto a panel. And this allowed me, I didn't have to stick with the rectangular format. I could break it up and have it be, I don't know if you can see the irregular shape of the photo onto the panel. And this is a kind of medium size, about 20-24. I did these bad photographs. I had one of those Holga cameras that are just terrible. The light quality and everything is so bad. You get these wonderful, funky photographs. So I did a number of portraits of my husband and I, and then did these portraits. So this is called Couple Holding Hands. And again, very small photographic information, and then the bigger area around it being painted. It's about 12 by 12. In Jungian philosophy, everybody has a king and a queen inside of them, and they determine kind of what's going on. So this was my homage to Jung. This is called King and Queen, and that's again my husband and I. And I took photos, cut them up, put them back together. So if you were to see the photos, they would be irregular. They would be sort of wrong, which is what I want. So in 2004, I just stopped painting, and it wasn't as clear as, oh, I'm not going to paint. It was more that other things were more important. And I've always had a pretty rigorous schedule. I always work in the afternoons. And when my daughters were born, I took care of them in the mornings, and then they had daycare in the afternoons. And my husband's always been really great about helping with that. And so I always work in the afternoons. That's my best time. I would work 5 days of the week. And I realized I wasn't painting. I was doing dishes. I was going to soccer games. I was just not there. And I finally realized that I kind of needed a sabbatical. And so I took off some time. And I had all these other images I'm showing you were film. And I had sworn I would never, ever, ever use a digital camera. So I learned to use a digital camera. I learned to use very basic Photoshop, and got a scanner and did all those horrible things I never thought I'd do. The other thing that I started to do that I swore adamantly I'd never do was paint with acrylic. I mean, plastic paint. Ugh. So there I was with my new digital skills, my digital camera, and using acrylic. And what I ended up doing was realizing that I just had painted myself out with oil paint, and I needed another way to work. But again, it wasn't easy. It took about a year where I experimented and I goofed up, and I would take a photograph and try and glue it down over a painted surface, and it just looked stupid. It was just a photo glued down. Finally, what I realized was that if I took the photograph and cut it up and made it be something other than what it was, it began to speak metaphorically, and I began to develop these images. And this was one of the first ones. It's pretty big. It's about 30 by 40. And it's called Birds Leaving. And it's a lot of what was going on now too is, of course, we're all just crazily concerned with the climate. But at that time in 2004, it was still kind of on the horizon. But well, shouldn't have been, but it wasn't in the headlines the way it is now. But it was about what we're doing and how the animals are leaving, and it's this sort of terrible thing we're doing to our environment. So I had a photograph of a dead duck that the dogs had dragged up to the backyard, and I used bits of pieces of him to make the birds, along with tumbleweeds and sticks and stones and just everything. And then the figure, again, I was just using materials to make something else. And then, of course, you can see the dead bird, the duck. That's actually the full photograph of the duck underneath him. So the door suddenly swung open, and I began to realize how I needed to work. And so that's who I've been working since. So this is another one. I had a residency in Virginia, Roanoke, Virginia, at Hollins University. And you all probably a little familiar with New Mexico, but we don't have much green. It's desert and bleak stuff, and not bleak, but it's not like Virginia. So the first thing I saw was this, and I was there in February, so the forests were denuded. The leaves were gone, and but this it was sort of like there were these forests, but bad stuff was going on. And one of the things was there was a yard full of concrete animals. And it's almost like we can take the forest away, don't no worries, because we can just put those concrete animals on our lawns and we're fine. So this is called Forest Father. And again, it was sort of a statement about the environment and just what was going on. He's made up of the leaves and branches of these denuded forests. And then the animals are all concrete. So they're this sort of comment on what we're replacing nature with. His head was from a mural, painted head that I photographed. It just had the right fierceness and anger. This is Forest Mother, and same idea, where and the other thing I want to emphasize is that the paintings lead me. I do the paintings first. I'm so thrilled with them that I have to come up with a collage element that will support that painting. If I'm going to do this great painting, damn it, I better make a collage that is just as good. And so again, in Virginia, I had trees, big trees to photograph. I had kudzu, which was killing everything, but they're dead in the winter. So they make these beautiful patterns, and that's what her lower torso, her butt, and that's all kudzu. And then her head, her upper torso and her legs, of course, are these beautiful big trees. This is gosh, what are those black? They're like crows, but everybody hates them. Anyway, so that's on her. And then these are actually the hands of a man named Wallace Simpson. And he's a naive artist. I went to visit him. Wonderful sculptor, does whirligigs, and he has these big, huge, worked hardened hands. And he'd done a sculpture of those hands. So I took a photograph of the hands. And then I don't know if everybody can see at the bottom, but there's actually a corpse, a figure laying there. Maybe not a corpse, but a figure made up of the kudzu and his hands projecting up. So Forest Mother.
Hey, dear Holly.
Yes.
Let's have a chat. I mean, this is fantastic. And you're bringing so much to the forefront for all of us artists and creative people in any field. And as you show us these, I'm just marveling, like everyone else is, at the decisions that you're making, and they're not rational decisions. And that reminds me of one of the first times I attended one of your lectures. It was at Camera Work, a million years ago.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Might have been 40 years ago. But you described your working method in a way that I've never forgotten. And I've quoted you a million times when I have taught photography classes. And you said, I sit in my studio. You kind of alluded to this a few minutes ago when you mentioned that you advise your students to let their egos go out and smoke a cigarette. But I think you might have used left and right brain analogies, which is completely scientifically accurate. I'll never forget, in San Francisco many years ago, you said, I sit in my studio and I wait for my left brain, who's telling me, you should go do the dishes. You should go, see what your daughter's doing. You should go wash clothes. You sit there patiently until your left brain tires and it gets bored and it leaves.
Right.
And then, and only then, could you begin to make these irrational decisions, which are
Right.
just so brilliant? Look at these figures made up of non-human parts. Uh, you
You're
know,
right. It's like you have to just sit that left brain out. You're stupid. Why are you doing this? No one's ever going to buy this. It's
right,
dumb.
right.
Why don't you do it this way? And you just sit there patiently suffering. And then finally your left brain goes, okay, screw you. And it goes away. And then your right brain can take over and it can do these beautiful and fantastic things you never knew existed.
Fantastic.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And
And
that's what I teach too. I just say, let that creative side of yourself drive the ship and get that other part. We'll get it out. We'll kick it out of here. So
later, I want to talk with you about how you begin your workshops. You know, you and I had that little chat.
yeah.
Uh, um, but I'm sure people also tell you, well, first of all, you know, the cliff notes of what you and I just now said is art making is really hard, you know.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
I'll bet you everybody you meet at one of your splashy openings says, oh, this looks like you had so much fun doing this.
Right.
So
And there's blood, on the surface and fingernails and stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And I think people think creativity is fun and they should enjoy it. And if they don't, they're doing it wrong. And I'm saying the opposite. No, no, you're on the right track. You're getting to that right brain side. So that's exactly right. So, so with that, so now we're up to 2008, and I'm in Roanoke during the residency, and this image, it was another prophetic one. I was alone during this residency. My family was back in New Mexico, and I had students, but I lived on campus, and it's a girls' school, and so it was fine, except I was lonely. I was kind of I felt like when I went out for a bike ride on the weekend, if a car hit me, no one would know it. If I fell into the bar ditch, it would be days before anybody found my body because no one would miss me. So there was a kind of a loneliness going on. So at the same time, I was working on this painting. A friend of my daughter's disappeared he was going to school at Middlebury in Vermont, I think that is. And he disappeared. He came home for Christmas break and he went out and he never came back and they didn't know what happened to him. And so I think that was kind of on my mind. I was concerned and upset about him. And he was the only son. He was Hispanic. He'd gotten a full scholarship to Middlebury, was very gifted and, just a neat guy. And so I did this painting. And it's this angel is leading this child away. And you don't know more than that, except that something's going on. And the child's body is made of ores, and the angel, of course, is got her body made of concrete, and then of course the crows. And so then I did the painting and several months went by, and then spring came and they found him, and he'd gone into the river. He'd gone through the ice, gone into the river, and of course frozen to death. And so when you see this painting, I knew it. I mean, there was a part of me that understood that he had died in this way, that this had happened. It always spooks me when these things happen because I don't know where that stuff is coming from. I'm not a woo-woo person, but clearly this was a prophetic, accurate painting about what happened to this kid. Um, and again, I think that when you're attached to your creative self, you get those signals, you get what matters coming through. This was 2008. This was when all the crash and everything that was going on, and uh, it was the whole country was terrible. We were in this depression, and people were getting kicked out of their houses. And so I did this image, which is it's called "Trying to Keep Trouble Away," and of course you can see how the painting really defines what the space around it is. And then this wonderful sort of half man, half woman with a light bulb just saying, get out of here. I'm not going to put up with you. Be gone. So that was my response to that awful stuff. Um, I've always been fascinated with the whole thing with birds and cats. I guess that birds are the number one killer, or cats are the number one killer of birds. And so this is called Hungry Cat. Again, you can see my wonderful trees from Virginia that I was able to use to make these trees. And then the cat's body is made up of these nests. with eggs, and then these intestines are a hose that is out in our front yard. And then, of course, these birds were bird corpses that I had revived, photographed and revived. So they're sitting on his back. So hungry cat. This is my, I had a postcard for a long time that was about the, what's it called? The Revelation, when God destroys the world, but all the good people shoot up and the bad people go down. It was a picture of a car crashing and then people going up to heaven and other people. I just love that image. So this is really about that, isn't it? I think it's the Revelation it's called. And this is also a new process using something called crackle paint, where you would do that on your table or your chair, and you'd make the paint look weathered. So when you do it as an artist, you get this beautiful surface, but it's a trick. It's just, you just do it and put the paint and it crackles. So I had these wonderful um, um, uh, barbecue tops that I'd actually taken photographs at another naive artist in Mississippi. So they weren't just grill tops; they were actually used in his making art in his home. And then these are Aztec primitive heads. So, and this is something we just talked about briefly. I just love folk art, primitive art. It's just, to me, it's the best. It's the real deal. So I think there's always that in my mind when I'm making images. And here are the figures shooting off either up or down to heaven. It's not clear, because it is not clear where we go when the end of the world comes. We have we live in a semi-rural community, Corrales, New Mexico, and we have lots and lots of coyotes, and I have loved them. I just think they're wonderful beings. At the same time, I don't love them because I have a little 16-pound terrier who thinks that he should kill them and devour them and pull their eyes out. And of course, it's the opposite. The coyotes in a heartbeat will take Nico and carry him off. So he's had a couple of encounters where he's been grabbed, but he got away and so forth. So I'm always happy to see them, but then I'm always worried that they're going to grab Nico and we'll lose him. So I do coyotes all the time, but there's always with this slight edge of apprehension. And this is a painting for a while. I was doing these drip pours where I would take paint and just pour big quantities of paint and then let them run down. And then, of course, this one is flipped. But this is the coyotes that I use for the most part are dead. They're roadkill, and I'll stop and photograph them and then incorporate their bodies back. So I kind of feel like I'm bringing them back to life in a way. So this is called coyote turning. I kind of love that cliche too of the coyote, howling at the moon. So every time I have a coyote in a title, I just imagine museum curators and collectors going, "Oh, coyote!" But it's a little more than that. So this is called Dog with Spots. This is, I think, trying to allow the paint more and more and more to determine what the image is going to be. So you have to imagine me on my porch, and I do have fun painting, Brian. I do. I mean, I'm covered with paint. I paint outside. I can't stop. There's the fairy tale of the little girl, or the girl who puts on the shoes and can't stop dancing, and they have to cut her feet off. And that's kind of what I feel like. Once I start, I can't stop. So I just, yeah. So I just do these paintings and then figure out where is it gonna take me? How can I follow the breadcrumbs and figure out what the image is? So Dog with Spots. This is another one where I laid down a wash and then came back in. This is called Fox with Birds. And these are all birds that were either dead or that I photographed in some way or another. And then the fox head was a friend sent me a photograph of a fox that had died that she'd photographed. So in this case, I used someone else's photograph. But I love the way the wash formed the body with the birds on his back. And you can also see the surface. It's real scratched and paint's been pushed around and scraped away. So the surfaces are really wonderful to see. And I think whenever I try and do anything digitally or see prints or anything, I just miss that so much, that surface. This is another, it's kind of like a fever dream. But what I did was I had these active areas and then I painted them out and then had to figure out what to do with them. So it's called Woman with Her Own Coyote. And that's me, another self-portrait. And just the way a fever dream, everything is sort of distorted. It, to me, that's kind of what this was about. And the coyote's legs are the same as my legs. I mean, I use my legs to do that. So he's my coyote, and we're out there standing in the gray paint. And those are my arms. That's my watch. Those are my Dansko clogs that I wear when I paint.
I think you have a lot in common with coyote legs, Holly. People who know you are an avid runner
And biker.
and biker.
Yeah, cyclist, I'm not sure other kinds.
Not a biker chick.
Yeah. I have this long involved love affair with horses. When I was 4 years old, I traded my bottle for a pair of cowboy boots so that I could ride. And so horses come back in again and again and again. And more recently, I'll show some of those images. But I had a friend who had an older horse who's going to, in a couple of years after I took this, she actually had to put the horse down because he was so old. But this is called Old Horse. And I use the body of the horse is in a parking garage inside. The grease and stuff never go away. So they're beautiful surfaces. And I do photograph a lot of concrete, graffiti, just those surfaces so that I can use them. And of course, this wonderful head, Chevy's head, as he turns and looks at us with the bird on his back. Big painting, probably 55 by 60. That's big for me. Another coyote, coyote talking. And if you can see in the body, that's actually the corpse of a coyote. That's his belly and his legs. This is another roadkill coyote that the head had just been killed, so it's pretty fresh. And so it's distressing me when I take these photographs, but I do it. I know I'll use these images. And of course, my hands, the tumbleweeds that are around here, and he's just spinning a yarn. He's telling big tales. And I think it's that idea that it's that personification of what I understand from myth and from my own experience with coyotes. They're so smart. They are so smart. So I took a little detour and I went to my computer and I started doing digital images. And I use Photoshop badly, as well as Corel Painter, which is like more kind of in a way for hobbyist stuff. But they have all these wonderful brushes. Like this is a whatever, you get these wonderful sparkly things. And so I did these computer images. So they live in the computer. They can be printed out any size. And this one was actually called Dark Rider. And it was based on a friend who suddenly died of a heart attack. So it was sort of my homage to George. But anyway, so I did that, and then it just kind of never went too much further. It was almost like what I was saying about the surface. It wasn't rich enough. There wasn't enough. And I can do it in the computer, but I don't have the same, I don't get carried away the way I do when I paint. I think I'm still in my head and, oh, wait, what's going to happen there? And so, but I did improve my skills, my Photoshop skills. So that was good. The next thing I started doing with my painting was doing the painting and then drawing in the figure with paint so that I was stuck with it. I couldn't come create something else. I had to stick with what I'd painted. So it doesn't sound like that big a deal, but it really was, because I was forming it and having to deal with it. What I would do is I would put the paint down, and then I'd take a great big, they're called, they're big drywall spreader things. And they're like what Gerhard Richter uses. So I do the paint, I do the drawing, and then if I didn't like it, I'd wipe it out and then do it again till I got what I wanted. And then I took that image and came back in with photographs. So in this case, these are snakes that I had photographs of in a religious image. And then of course the snake at the bottom is called Snake Handler. Same thing here, cowboy smoking. I just couldn't help sticking that cigarette in his mouth, those cowboys out riding around, Marlboro Man. Somebody had a question? David Levinson?
Oh, Diane.
I do. It was about the
Diane, sorry.
hi there. It's the last piece that you said it
Oh,
was
yeah,
a religious piece?
the snake handler. Her
Yes.
head was from a religious
That's
painting,
what
but
I
it's
was
not.
wondering. And is
Yeah.
that the same? It looks like a Giotto or some altarpiece.
You know, it may have been what I have a number of books that have uh, those images in them, and I photograph those and use bits and pieces of those.
And
So
is that a similar head to the young man who was found in the ice?
yes, exactly,
I see.
exactly.
Thank you.
I should have known you'd know that those folk arty kind of. Um, so so again, cowboy smoking, fairly big. You can see where I've moved the paint, done it maybe 3 or 4 times, where I've smeared it and then come back in and drawn it again with ink, and then come back in and put in the bits and pieces of the photograph to make it finally work.
And Holly, as you know, many of us know, I'm probably stating the obvious, but one of the great backstories about the Marlboro smoking man, that handsome, rugged
Yeah,
model, you know what
yeah,
he died of?
cancer.
Yeah,
He
like at
died
age
of cancer.
40 or something.
Yeah, I know.
Unbelievable.
I know, I know. Oh, by the way, he died of cancer.
Yeah.
Anyway. So this is again the same way of working. This is called Dave and Goliath, and just fun, to have Goliath. And this again, Diane, is from a book I have on folk art. So this was a sculpture, a head of Goliath, and then so I used it with a rock already in the head, and then had David from another figure, another folk art figure, throwing the rocks at Goliath. We had a couple of years ago, my daughter left her big dog with us. He was a great big Mastiff cross, and we just adored the guy. He was just wonderful, huge, huge, head size of a dinner plate. His name was Cash, and he had lived in my daughter's apartment, so he was always kind of inside. And so when he lived with us, he was able to be out in the backyard, laying in the dirt in the sun, with the birds flying around. And so it was really, this is sort of an homage to him. It's called Guard Dog, and he would bark when people went by, this big booming bark, and just took care of us. So this was, of course, the painted background. I did this whole background is dictionary pages. And then this is a new technique that I started using. They're transfers, emulsion transfers. So you can actually take the photograph and completely transfer it to your surface, so that instead of cutting out the tree with all the birds, I can put it down, and anything that's white goes away and the photograph is left. It's real tricky though. It's a pain to work with. It doesn't work sometimes, does work other times, but when you get this wonderful resolution of reality with what's behind coming through. This is another one, Horse with Colors, where I did the same transfer process. I had painted it, and then I put the horse over, and you can see how the paint comes through where the paint is. It's got this darker color. And this is a horse I photographed years ago. He was at a rodeo grounds, and he was in bad shape. He had cuts and bruises, and he was thin, and he looked anxious, and just, of course, exactly what I was looking for, kind of, in my view of the world, you look for the things that are hurt or wounded, rather than the big, strong ones. Anyway, and that's that transfer process. This is, it's called Old Cowboy, and it's made from the photo are tree roots, and the face is from we have a thing called, not a thing, it's a stop on the freeway called Klein's Corners, and they have all this paraphernalia. They have jewelry and just all that Southwest stuff, that you can get. And one of the things they had were these carved wooden heads. So I took a photograph of the head, and then ended up doing this piece. Those are my cowboy boots on this painted ground. But I realized after I'd done it, that it was really about my husband's grandfather, who'd been a cowboy. And he had grown up in Texas and then moved to New Mexico, and he was just a cowboy. That's what he did. And this was really about Irby. You can see I had fun here. This is the belt buckle, and that's a bird's nest. And then we have lots of Navajo rugs, so I use those as backgrounds. And then these great, his bolo tie. I mean, this is all just so Western, that if you live in New York, you probably wouldn't know what a bolo tie was, but we sure do. This is another couple one, I think. They keep popping back up. This is called Couple Considering. One thing I tend to do is make the woman bigger than the man, which I think is always kind of interesting. And this again is using that transfer process so that you get what's behind comes through. So the Japanese lettering was actually transferred onto the figures, and that allows you to not have to cut around, or when you're gluing and pasting, that limits you in a lot of ways. And you can always tell a transfer because what's behind you can see coming through. And then I painted over this with oil paint. I just thought, what the heck? I've done a lot with acrylic. Let me try then just paint with oil paint on this one. This is called, gosh, it's about asking. It's about having permission. And again, I have hundreds and hundreds of photos of horses. This is actually from a palette. You can get this palette paper, and that comes gray so you can see the colors better. And when I teach, I go around and I get palette paper from other students, from other classes, and then I can use those either as collage element, or I can peel the paint off and use that. So those are my hands. And then this beautiful Arab horse head. And then of course the legs are the chair as well as the legs. And then those same dance goes that I just love. Another transfer you can tell because of what's coming behind, a yellow coyote. And this was using, again, it's like you're always trying to up the ante. As soon as I get comfortable with the way I paint or the way I do something, then I have to screw it up and try something else and make something. I think our creative self does not like easy. It doesn't like anything that it knows it's going to happen. So it's like I'm always having to come up with a new way to make the image or to put it down. So the body of the coyote was actually a stain that I put on several times, and that rectangle was the third stain. It made it the heaviest. And then the head was actually from a coyote that I photographed in the airport in Oakland. And it was a sculpture of a coyote, and it had been made from photographs that then had been turned into a 3D coyote. So, I mean, talk about removing from the source, in the airport, in the showcase, in the Oakland airport, now onto becoming this yellow coyote. Girl floating. Again, this is the head is from a painting, I think from the San Antonio Art Museum, this young girl. The paper, I have all kinds of paper, and I mean, my studio is just either a nightmare or an artist's dream, depending on how you look at it. I never throw anything away. Everything is potential collage information. And again, the trees at the bottom, the transfer process, so I can really make the trees be crisp. So she's just floating around. A pretty big piece, 30 by 40-ish. This last couple of years, I started horseback riding again after not riding for a long time. And so it was interesting because I rode a lot as a kid. I was a good rider. I had a horse. I rode all over the place. That was my bicycle, was my horse. And I could jump on the horse from the ground and canter off bareback. And well, not so much anymore. My body's not the same. So as I've been riding, it's like kind of scary. I'm up in this big animal, and I'm far from the ground. And if something happens, my bones aren't the way they used to be. So it's fun, but at the same time, it's a little anxious making. So this is called Awkward Rider. And it's really about this new experience I'm having with this horse thing back in my life. The back end of the horse here, that's hair that I transferred onto the horse's body. This is the wood from Roanoke. And then this is a photograph of a horse that I had taken. I think it's that same horse, the poor guy that had been at the rodeo grounds. And then again, a head from some kind of other source that wasn't my own. And this is construction paper. When I'm in Colorado teaching, I teach at Anderson Ranch quite a bit, and there's a deer. Bears are a problem. They're a real problem, and especially recently because of the drought and there not being enough forage for them. So the bears are always coming down, getting into people's houses. It's a real, it's this wilderness that civilization is encroaching on, and so bears will break into people's cabins, into their cars. You'll find the bear on the bike path and have to, watch out if it's a mother with cubs and stuff. So I think that bear awareness is there. And so when I developed this piece, I had a bunch of just interesting papers that I began to put them together, and suddenly here was this bear, and and a scary bear. He's got a hand in his belly. He's certainly not friendly, but yet he is. He's got the head of a dog. He's got that big warm, like our dog Cash. So it was really fun putting it together. Fun, again, air quotes there. But you can see the background painting, the transferred trees, transferred birds. You can see the running paint, and then this bear. I also go to these real ugly, sort of almost primitive, like drawn with my foot kind of paintings. And I liked them a lot, but they don't seem to get selected for shows. They don't sell very well. And again, it says more about me than I want people to know. But if you do something and it never sells, you get discouraged. So you find that you want to please people as well as yourself. But these paintings don't please anybody but me. But a couple talking, it's this wonderful, rough, harsh. Their hair is trees and bushes and birds. And I just wish the world would snap to and realize how great they are. I also decided that I would just be really brave and just draw right on the surface, just make the painting without using the photograph. Of course, I couldn't completely do it, so the eyes are photographic, but everything else I drew looking at a photograph of a dog named DOG, by the way, and then had fun coming in and doing another kind of transfer technique where you use shiny paper, you paint on it, you put it down, and then you get these wonderful effects from that. So, and again, there's a lot of that is what I teach in my workshops, is different ways of applying paint and transferring materials, not only to photograph, but other materials. And this is a little tiny painting. It's probably 8 by 10, DOG. Here's another one, self-portrait, that I did the same thing. I looked at a photograph of me, and again, just got to stick that cigarette in there, even though I've never smoked. It's something evil, wicked, not evil, but wicked, like bad girl Holly. And the eyes are photographic, but everything else was washes and drawing and paint. It's real scary. It's really like, oh my gosh, you can't go back. You're stuck with what you have. This one, this is another, these are all self-portraits now. This one was one of the first ones I did when I switched to the new style of working. And what happened was I was in Mississippi, and my friend took me to the Reverend Daniels, and he was outside of Vicksburg, and he had this he had written all these prophecies and all this religious stuff in pink and black on his house and inside. And so I photographed it, and I've used his text a lot. It's just wonderful. They're misspelled, and they're just kind of great. And they hint at sort of religious, but without me saying, oh, by the way, go to church on Sundays. And then this is right down at the end of our road. There's this beautiful old cottonwood tree, and it's probably one of the oldest trees in the area. And it had a ladder, steps going up that kids had put in. And then the dog was my nephew, Alex, but it's called Woman with Small Dog. And it was really about this relationship of the world, bringing it in, and then using my own head, which was blurred, to be the self-portrait. This is another self-portrait, smaller one. It's called Snake Neck. And this is fairly recent. This is like 2017. And I really it's that thing, you know, when you want to say something but you can't. You're blocked. You just can't, and that's that snake neck. That's what's going on. Combination of two different faces that I put together, and then this painted background. This is dirt, which again I think makes a great torso. Here's another self-portrait. This is called Beautiful Woman, and it's my torso here, and everything else was from. This was a dead snake. This was on asphalt, different bits and pieces, but it was really about, I think, being beautiful no matter what. I did a couple of great big pieces as public art proposal. Haven't gotten them yet, fingers crossed. But what I did was I took paint peels, which is when you take acrylic paint and you pour it down on plastic, you let it dry, and then you can peel it back up and then, of course, put it back down. So the horse's body is made up of these paint peels and the clouds and the cactus and stuff. And then, of course, the horse's head and legs and stuff are from photographs. But they're just wonderful. They're so something else. They're paint, but not paint. And you can shape them and turn them into other things. So I did a number of these large horse images. These are about 52 by 60, so pretty big. Here's another one called Horse Reaching. Same deal with the paint peels and very simple background. First I did the horses, took them off, painted a solid background, and then put the horses back on, which worked, but I wasn't wild about because it wasn't as fun as going in and throwing paint around. This was one of the first paintings I did during the pandemic. And again, I had started writing again, and that kind of pulled me through the pandemic and the shutdown. But this is called Blessing. And this is again an angel from a art book, and then a horse from my past, and then these beautiful paint peels. And this I did again with oil paint. So I put the collage down, and then I came back with oil paint, painted in the shadows, painted in the texture and surface around it. So it allows me to put the collage down and then have the paint match the photo instead of the photo matching the paint. These are very recent. The paintings I did 6-7 years ago. They're little. They're just 11 by 14, and they were washes, ink washes. And I could never figure out what to do with them, but I just love them. And finally, I figure them out. And I took it's how far can you go with a face before it's not a face or when it becomes a face. So I did 6 of these, and they all had to do with these different eyes and noses and mouths and just forming these faces. I've got some more here. So this one is a little bit bigger. And again, you can see the ink wash, which I put down, and then the gloves. This is my husband's face, someone else's eyes. But what happened was that I entered these into a competition. Let me go back here. In Brooklyn called Clump Ching Fresh. And every year they invite artists to submit work, and then they have an exhibit. Of the 20 finalists, they take 5 artists to exhibit in the gallery. So I was one of the 5 selected people. Then the work just opened on Saturday. So it was really an honor. And I haven't gotten into competitions lately, so I just almost fell over when Deborah Ching called to tell me that I'd gotten into the show. So anyway, so anybody in Manhattan or in Brooklyn, go by and see the show.
And Holly, now it's time to let people know where they can see an original Holly Roberts in Carmel. Walk into the CPA.
There you go.
Very generously donated a fabulous face portrait to the auction fundraiser. It's beautiful, right in the main wall.
And I love doing that fundraiser because people put their names in, right? They put their names in, like you pay so much, and it's not like highest price gets it. It's you get your name drawn out of a thing, right? Isn't that the way it works?
Well, we used to have little boxes with raffle tickets, but now because of the pandemic, and Jastrab, was unable to even have the gallery open last year. So now the auction has gone online. So it it is bidding now.
Oh, it is bit of
Yeah.
that. I always love the other, because you didn't get your feelings hurt,
That's for
if no
sure.
one bid on your piece or,
For one $5 ticket, you might go home with a Holly Roberts.
right, right. And I just love that idea. So anyway, a good old COVID once again. And every year I donate a piece. I just love CPA. So it's important to me to make sure I have a piece to help however I can help out, can
Thank
do
you.
that. Yeah. So anyway, so this piece is very new, 2021. And again, I think it's going back to that whole environmental thing. It's another forest mother where she's got her animals, and she's kind of reminding us that we got to take better care of things. And part paint peel, part photographs of mine, part photographs from her face again from the art book. I use her a lot because she's got such a beautiful, still sort of religious face. And then the little coyotes down here, and then the snake at her feet. And again, those clogs, contacted Dansko, tried to see if they would be interested in like using these in their ads, or they couldn't even get my tiny finger in the door. They're so closed, and because I have so many Danskos in these paintings. So anyway, and not to promote Dansko, but this is called Coyote Mother. And these again, she's out there. She's made up of these different things. This is a world we have to take care of. And these are the creatures and the things that are so important that we just can't lose sight of them. Not that you all need a lecture on that, but so these are kind of getting to the end here. These are some of the most recent ones I've done. And I always tell my students, do not use canvas board. It's just terrible stuff and it doesn't hold up. So I had a bunch of canvas board and canvas board, for anybody that doesn't know, it's a mat board covered with canvas. They're very inexpensive. They're Hobby Lobby kind of stuff. And so there I am with my canvas board, after I preach not. So the rule is do what you say not to do. That seems to help your creative self get going. So this is called Jesus Leaving. And he's just had it. He's thrown his cross in the back and he's taken off. And he's not having to do with that. He's not going to be hung up on the cross. These are little 11 by 14. That is it.
You've raised so many great issues, so many conversation starters. I'm glad we have a little time for anyone who'd like to start a conversation with our artiste today. I certainly have a ton of things I'd love to talk about.
And I love questions, really, anything that comes to mind. What toothpaste do I use? Any question you want to ask.
Here's something you can really help us with, as you have all for this whole session. At the beginning of your legendary workshops, sometimes you have the students just be quiet. There might be a dozen people in the room, which is so self-conscious, and you'll have everyone just be quiet for 5 minutes and just get settled. But another thing you do, which let's talk about, this is so helpful, I think, to all of us. You ask each student, what are you worried about? What are you afraid of as we head into this workshop?
And what Brian is saying are things I don't do anymore at all. Because for a while I was trying to have people meditate for 5 minutes and they just didn't like it. It's just people are too antsy and itchy. And then the thing about the saying, what are you afraid of? That was too much too soon. It was like, it makes you too vulnerable. We can ask that question at the end of the workshop when people know each other and feel comfortable and have gotten brave. But at the beginning, it was too much. So I don't.
That was heavy duty for sure.
Yeah.
Because we don't trust each other yet. Just like
Yeah,
when you
exactly.
teach class,
You really, for a good workshop, and it was interesting in this last workshop I had on Whidbey Island, one student hadn't gotten vaccinated and everybody was mad at her because of that, because it meant we had to wear masks the whole time. And I had to say to the students, you can't do this. We have to work as a group. You can't isolate somebody and be angry. She didn't get her vaccination, but that doesn't matter. We've got to pull together and work. And that's that trust thing is so important. And that's why workshops are so great, because when you have a bunch of people, 10, 12 people who trust and like each other, stuff happens. It's just magical. Anime can talk about that again. That's where the strength of the workshop is better than being alone. You have this, you're building on this foundation of trust and care. And so you can't have any kind of negative anger or anything like that. That's got to go out the door.
Yeah. Let me just follow through on that, Holly. Let me ask you, why would you ask somebody what they're afraid of heading into about their art or heading into a workshop?
I think because that opens it, that opens you, that lets you, that opens that vulnerability. And that's what you want for your creative self, is so vulnerable and so tender. And so if that worked, if people felt good enough, that would right away begin to establish what's the worst thing that could happen? Oh, well, it's not so bad. I mean, except again, you need to have trust to be able to be vulnerable because you're afraid. And that means you're vulnerable about it. So
Yeah. I think it helps people say out loud or just realize consciously what they are afraid of. It
yeah,
may be the
yeah,
first time they've ever been consciously aware of
yeah.
something they're afraid of in their art, you know?
And at the end of the workshop, no problem. I think
Yeah.
people will say, I was so terrified that I was going to be the worst person. I was blah, blah, blah. But at the beginning, too much. You're kind of watching everybody. And
Yeah.
so I've learned all the way through these years what works and what doesn't. I also used to say to people, if I don't have at least one person cry in a workshop, I don't feel it's a successful workshop. And everybody's faces would go white, and what I really meant was there'd be these emotional breakthroughs where people would cry, and that was fine. But I thought, that's scaring people. So I stopped saying that too. Although I say it every once in a while.
Who does take your workshops? Are there people with a range of background in photography, collage, art, painting, or does people come with a certain level of mastery before they can benefit?
Yeah, different. Mostly people who just haven't done that kind of thing. Beginners, people who know my work and want to get ideas of stuff. Like in the next fall, I'll be teaching a workshop where it'll be first beginners and then morphs over to the second week, which is people who are more experienced or have taken that first workshop. So, but really anybody, as long as they don't mind crying.
So Holly, I'm looking at your blouse, and being a fabric person, it looks like indigo shibori. Did you do it?
No, I got it at Kohl's. I hate to say it, but isn't it beautiful? It's such a
It is.
beautiful blouse. I couldn't believe it. And that's why I was on sale at Kohl's, because no one wanted it. It was an artist shirt.
Yeah, I was wondering, you don't do these certain things. You don't ask people, their vulnerabilities up front in a workshop. How do you open a workshop or break the ice with a group?
Well, the first thing I do, I've gone back and forth about this. One thing I don't do is I don't have people show their work at the beginning, because it tends to frighten everybody else. So the first thing I'll do is I'll just have everybody go around and just introduce themselves. And a lot of times I can just start teasing people and joking, and that laughter and that makes people feel comfortable. And then I get people painting right away. I just say, come on, get your paints out. We're going to, and I'll do a little demonstration, but that getting their hands dirty, making a mess, getting going, that's what takes them right into the water, and the canoe's taken off. So that's how we do it.
Thank you.
Hey, I recall something you did way, 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 way back. When I think of Holly's work, I think about courage, especially as a photographer. We take a picture and we stop. Holly takes a picture and that becomes raw material for a larger narrative. Miss Holly Roberts, millions of years ago, you foresaw that photography students, if they brought a stack of their 3 or 4 or 5 photographs to one of your workshops, you already knew they would be scared out of their mind to overrule it or to opaque it out with oil paints. You had them exchange prints.
Back when prints were precious, right?
That was so smart, because the minute I take somebody else's photograph, oh, I've got the courage to mess this thing up,
Yeah,
Our
no
own
big deal.
kids,
Yeah,
you can't mess up our own children.
yeah,
So,
that's exactly right.
I mentioned
Yeah.
it was some way to get people, to give them the courage to begin to apply paint or to make changes.
Yeah. And it's funny. I mean, as little kids, we had no trouble messing with paint, but as adults, people are almost shaking, with like, what am I going to do here? And it's just, you just do it. You just whoop, throw it down, and that's what I do. Is I throw the paint, I roll it, I take my hand, I do stuff, and I think people kind of go, oh, I can do that. So no brushes.
Yeah, Any other bits of good advice you'd like to get from Miss Holly while we still have her for another couple minutes?
Or any more wonderful compliments? I just love
Marilyn had a question about your cutting and how sharp and precise it is. So,
the deal with cutting is there are two kinds of people, X-Acto knife cutters and scissor cutters. And if you're a scissor cutter, you just have to get a good pair of scissors, and you can't get away with it using bad scissors. And the X-Acto knife people, they just have to have really good. I'm not an X-Acto knife person, but you need to be precise. You need to cut those edges. You can't have white showing. You can't have rips or tears. So cutting and gluing are real skills. You have to be a craftsperson to do those. And I would say get yourself and it's not small scissors. It's the blade. It's how good the blade is. So that's what's important.
Yes, well, I'm absolutely in love with your work. And I do have experience as a painter, sadly, not as a photographer. And I'm wondering, and I've never done collage, how I could kind of teach myself how to do this and still stay at home.
Easy peasy. Got to use acrylic because you can't glue over oil. Get your printer and print out some images and then just cut them up, or paint some paper, cut it up, glue it back down. You'll begin to see that there's a path.
And what kind of glue do you use for collage?
Polymer medium.
Okay.
Polymer medium.
Yeah. And again, you can go to CPA and take a good look at Holly's really kind of three-dimensional artwork. So you can see paper on top of paper. It's so beautiful. And paint on top of paint and paper.
And the other big secret is you take a credit card, like one you don't care about, and you use it to adhere, to scrape over the top to adhere it down. That's a big Holly Roberts secret.
Okay.
Only on this group am I going to give that secret to.
Thank you.
Dear Holly, it's been a joy spending time with you. And this, as much as we teachers do not like Zoom, we'd much rather be in the classroom with each other. It's fantastic to be able to have you educate us and share your work with us from 1,000 miles away in New Mexico.
Well, thank you. It's been really fun, and I've just had a ball. So thank you, everybody.
You are the epitome of a courageous artist, and we've seen you make changes, make transitions. This would have been a question of mine, but I'll just leave it as a compliment. You know, while all other artists in the art world spend their whole lives reaching a brand or a style that's recognizable, you can spot a Holly Roberts from across the room. Your first body of work where you painted oils on top of photographs.
Yeah.
Nobody else would have ever given that up. You know,
Yeah.
And wiped out. They were sold out before it opened. You gave that up.
Yeah.
Did something else, which is now recognizable from across the room. So I give you a world of credit for having to follow where your art leads you.
Well, thank you. I haven't had any choice. It's got to do what you got to do. So, but thank you so much.